Hi, my friend. Tonight we're going to travel back to the sun-baked banks of the Nile, where the air smells faintly of incense, papyrus scrolls rustle in the shadows, and someone, somewhere, is rubbing moldy bread into a wound with complete confidence. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where medicine and magic were practically roommates. You are standing in a sandstone corridor of a temple called the House of Life. Torches flicker along the walls as a priest-doctor chants an invocation to Thoth, god of wisdom. Nearby, a patient lies on a stone table, awaiting a treatment that involves both herbs and, possibly crocodile dung. You probably wouldn't survive this, but hey, the placebo effect is eternal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it by you? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Magic or medicine? When we think of doctors today, we imagine sterile gloves, crisp lab coats, and the faint smell of disinfectant in the air. But in ancient Egypt, the healer's toolkit included a bit more than bandages and stethoscopes. Try adding a dash of magic, a sprinkle of divine invocation, and maybe a whispered spell or two, because in that golden kingdom of pharaohs and pyramids, the line between doctor and sorcerer wasn't just blurry, it was practically non-existent to the Egyptians. Health wasn't simply a physical matter. It was spiritual, cosmic, even political. Sickness wasn't just about bacteria, it could be the result of a god's displeasure, a curse flung your way by a jealous neighbor, or an imbalance of forces only a priest could decipher. This wasn't superstition to them, it was science, just dressed in a lot more eyeliner and amulets. Physicians, often trained in temple schools, weren't just medics, they were intermediaries between the mortal and the divine. They would memorize sacred texts and healing formulas from thick scrolls like the Ebers or Edwin Smith papyrus, and when someone fell ill, they didn't just reach for herbs, they reached for hymns and rituals as well. A patient with stomach pain, for example, might receive a poultice made from dates and cumin, accompanied by a spell to drive out the demon thought to be nibbling at their insides. Some of these spells are wonderfully specific. One from the Ebers papyrus goes something like, "Drive out the enemy that lives within the belly of this man. I bind you with linen soaked in wine. I cast you into the fire, and may Horus strike you with his spear." Honestly, it sounds more like a breakup text than a medical incantation. Even the gods had roles in healing. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, was said to have invented medicine itself. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, could both cause plagues and cure them depending on her mood, which was temperamental, to say the least. If Sekhmet sneezed near your village, you might want to start saying your goodbyes. The temples where healing was taught and practiced were called Parank, or House of Life. Inside, priests studied scrolls that combined herbal remedies with magical rituals. They believed that for healing to work, the body and spirit both needed treatment. You couldn't separate the soul from the symptom, the divine from the disease. To us, that might seem odd, but let's consider this. In our own time, people still light candles for loved ones in hospitals. They pray, meditate, visualize white light, drink ginger tea, and whisper intentions. Maybe we're not so far removed from ancient Egypt after all, just with better plumbing and less donkey fat. What's truly fascinating is that some of their treatments did work, not necessarily because of the magic but because of the ingredients. They used honey as an antiseptic, which modern science confirms is incredibly effective at fighting bacteria. They applied moldy bread to wounds, possibly the earliest form of penicillin, long before Fleming ever noticed a petri dish. So were Egyptian doctors real physicians, or just mystics in linen kilts? Historians still debate whether the magical elements were merely spiritual comfort, or if practitioners genuinely believed their chants and curses were doing most of the heavy lifting. Maybe both. But one thing's certain. In ancient Egypt, healing wasn't just about patching up a wound, it was about restoring harmony between you, the gods, and the invisible world. And sometimes, that took a little magic. House of Life. Imagine a place where prayers echo off polished sandstone walls. The smell of incense floats in the air like an invisible veil, and rows of scrolls line shelves guarded by solemn scribes in white linen. You are in an ancient Egyptian temple, not just a house of worship, but a literal house of life. These institutions, known in ancient Egyptian as Pur-Ankh, were far more than just religious centers. They were sanctuaries of knowledge, libraries, laboratories, schools, and yes, hospitals all in one. In the eyes of the Egyptians, to study medicine was not just a pursuit of healing, it was a divine calling, entrusted to those chosen to commune with the wisdom of the gods. Temples like those at Heliopolis, Thebes, and Memphis were the main centers of learning, where young scribes and would-be doctors were initiated into the great mysteries. Their textbooks, not dusty hand-me-downs, but papyrus scrolls filled with medical incantations, recipes, surgical observations, and anatomical notes. The most famous of these, the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, are thought to have been copied, recopied, and carefully protected across centuries like sacred treasures. Training in a house of life wasn't easy. It involved memorizing thousands of lines of text, some practical, some poetic, and some downright perplexing. There were spells for every part of the body, for every possible wound or illness, and elaborate instructions on how to treat both the seen and unseen forces. One scroll might describe how to clean a wound with honey and resin. The next might instruct you to recite the words, "Be healed, O flesh," as Horus was healed in the cradle, as Ra rose in his bark. The doctors who graduated from these houses were not merely medics, they were philosopher priests, entrusted with healing both body and soul. Their title was Swinul, and their role was sacred. Many specialized in one part of the body, like doctor of the belly, doctor of the eyes, or doctor of the rectum. Yes, that was a real specialty. Others focused on women's health, dentistry, or even mental illness, though they wouldn't have called it that. Patients came to the temple not only for prayer, but for treatment. They might be greeted by a scribe who recorded their symptoms and their name, date, and time of visit. Bureaucracy, it seems, is eternal. The patient would then be examined by a priest-physician who would determine the source of the illness. If it was judged to be physical, they might prescribe herbs, poultices, or dietary changes. But if the illness was thought to have a spiritual cause, say, possession by a demon or the wrath of a god, then the treatment might involve ritual purification, amulets, or even a sleep in the temple cure known as incubation, in which the patient awaited a dream from a healing deity, and sometimes you'd get both. Imagine going to the doctor and receiving a jar of fig paste for your cough, plus a charm tied around your neck inscribed with a spell invoking Thoth, just in case. These houses of life weren't just for treating common folk either. Elite physicians traveled with the pharaohs and their families, offering care to royalty and noble officials. The prestige was immense. In fact, some doctors were buried in tombs that honored their service not only as healers of bodies, but as guardians of divine knowledge. Even Greek historians like Herodotus were impressed. He noted that Egyptian medicine was so advanced that doctors were assigned to specific diseases that was unheard of in most parts of the ancient world. But of course, this being ancient Egypt, the medical temples were not without a touch of the arcane. Some rooms were restricted to high-ranking priests. Some texts were written in layers of symbolism and metaphor, intended only for the initiated. Healing, in their view, was not a purely physical art, it was a sacred dance between human hands and divine will. Historians still debate whether the house of life was more library or hospital, more monastery or university. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What's certain is that these centers preserved a vast tradition of healing wisdom that echoed through the centuries, influencing later Greek, Roman, and even Islamic medicine. So next time you walk past a hospital and see rows of fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, just imagine instead a courtyard bathed in sunlight, a healer whispering to a scroll, and the belief that health was not just science but something beautifully sacred. The Ebers Papyrus. Let's dim the lights a little more and unroll a scroll. A very, very long scroll. Imagine a papyrus nearly 20 meters in length, so long it could stretch across your entire living room twice. This isn't just any dusty document. This is the Ebers Papyrus, one of the most fascinating medical texts ever discovered, and an absolute treasure trove of ancient Egyptian health knowledge, magic, and deeply questionable remedies. Dating from around 1550 BCE, during the reign of Amenhotep I, the Ebers Papyrus is essentially the ancient version of Webmed except written in hieratic script and without pop-up ads. It was discovered in 1873 by a German Egyptologist, Georg Ebers, from whom it takes its modern name. When he and his team deciphered its contents, they found themselves immersed in a whirlwind of herbs, incantations, and symptoms that range from too much coughing to snakes living in the belly. The scroll contains over 700 magical formulas and remedies, covering just about every medical complaint under the sun: digestive troubles, dental pain, skin conditions, broken bones, ear infections, and even what we'd now consider mental disorders. It's organized like a medical textbook with sections devoted to specific parts of the body, and even entire passages about tumors, diabetes-like conditions, and contraception. Let's pause there for a moment. Ancient Egyptian birth control. Yes, they had it. According to the Ebers Papyrus, one method involved a paste of ground dates, acacia, and honey inserted in the female body. Surprisingly, acacia contains substances that ferment into lactic acid, a mild spermicide, which means that somehow, amid the charms and chants, they may have stumbled onto something that actually worked. The remedies in the scroll swing wildly between brilliant and bizarre. A treatment for asthma involved inhaling a mixture of herbs heated on bricks, basically ancient aromatherapy. For intestinal worms, you drink a concoction of pomegranate rind and crushed beetles. And for baldness, well, crocodile fat and hippo liver might do the trick. No guarantees. Some entries are wonderfully specific. A remedy for toothache might say, crush the onion, mix with powdered ochre, place upon the tooth. Recite, may Horus guard the mouth, as he guards the boat of Ra. So, it's medicine with a dash of dental theology. The Ebers Papyrus also reflects the dual nature of Egyptian healing, a constant interplay between the physical and the spiritual. For example, some diseases were described as being caused by wandering spirits or evil winds, and the cure would involve both a potion and an incantation. One charm reads, O you who enter through the ear and nest in the stomach, I cast you out with the fire of Ra. Depart, foul one, who comes in the night. That's not just medical care, that's full-blown exorcism. But amid the incantations, there are signs of surprisingly modern logic. The Ebers Papyrus describes the circulatory system, noting that the heart is the center of the blood supply and that vessels branch out to various limbs. While their understanding wasn't anatomically accurate by today's standards, they thought all fluids came from the heart. The fact that they were mapping internal systems at all is remarkable. They also used honey in wound care, an antibacterial substance we now know to be incredibly effective. They used moldy bread on infected wounds, a primitive precursor to penicillin. They administered castor oil as a laxative. It wasn't just magic, it was medicine with results. What's more, the papyrus includes advice that feels shockingly human, even now. Cheer the patient. Let him hear music. Speak kind words. Feed him figs. Because, as it turns out, some parts of healing never go out of style. Historians still debate whether the Ebers Papyrus was a reference guide for physicians, a textbook for students, or a sacred compilation meant to be copied and preserved in temples. Perhaps it was all three. It is not the oldest Egyptian medical text. That title goes to the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, but it is the most comprehensive. Reading it today is like eavesdropping on 500-year-old consultations. You can hear the rustle of linen robes, the murmur of a chant, the quiet grinding of herbs in a mortar. It's a reminder that even in a world of gods and gold, illness was humbling and healing was a mix of knowledge, hope, and ritual. So next time your head aches and you reach for a bottle of aspirin, remember, someone once wrote out a remedy involving beer, tree bark, and a prayer to Isis, and maybe, just maybe, it worked. Gods of healing, close your eyes and imagine walking through a moonlit courtyard in ancient Thebes. Statues loom above you, their faces calm and mysterious, cloaked in shadow. The air is still, heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms and burning myrrh. Somewhere nearby, a priest whispers a prayer not to a surgeon but to a lion-headed goddess with a ferocious temper. Welcome to the divine side of ancient Egyptian healthcare. In this world, sickness and health weren't just biological states. They were gifts or punishments from the gods. To stay well, you needed more than a clean bandage, you needed cosmic favor. And the pantheon was crowded with deities who could heal you, or absolutely ruin your week. Let's start with Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war, plague, and oddly enough healing. Picture this: she's fierce, fiery, and associated with the scorching desert sun. Sekhmet was believed to unleash epidemics when angered and end them when appeased. Entire rituals were created just to calm her down if there was an outbreak of illness. Priests would chant hundreds of hymns to her, day after day, in hopes that she'd chill out and let everyone recover. The logic was simple: Sekhmet caused disease, so only she could remove it. It's a bit like giving the arsonist the only fire extinguisher in town. Then there's Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. While he's usually pictured in scholarly roles, recording the weighing of hearts or inventing hieroglyphics, he was also a patron of healing. Thoth was said to have created the magical spells used by physicians. Some believed his knowledge flowed into every medical papyrus, and that doctors were merely channels for his divine intellect. When you muttered a healing charm, it was Thoth's voice you were borrowing. Isis, the powerful mother goddess, was also revered for her healing abilities. Myths tell of her resurrecting her husband Osiris and curing her son Horus of snake bites and scorpion stings. That's a pretty solid resume for a divine nurse. Amulets bearing her name and image were worn by the sick, especially children and pregnant women. Bes, the squat, lion-faced dwarf god with a feathered crown and perpetually grumpy expression, also had a role in healing mostly of nightmares, childbirth complications, and demonic interference. He was the god you wanted in the nursery, chasing away malevolent spirits with a drum and a growl. Picture a stuffed animal that could exorcise your bedroom. Not bad. There were also more obscure healing deities. Serket, the scorpion goddess, protected people from venom and poisons. She was often invoked when someone was bitten or stung. And then there's Heka, whose very name means magic. Heka wasn't just a god, he was the personification of magical power itself. The word Heka became the root for the term magic in Egyptian language. Invoking Heka was essential in nearly every healing ritual. These gods didn't just sit on celestial thrones. Their images were etched into amulets, statues, and even medical tools. A scalpel might be decorated with symbols to invoke Thoth's precision or Sekhmet's strength. Sick rooms were adorned with protective charms. When doctors treated patients, they didn't just apply poultices, they also called down divine forces. Sometimes, divine healing took the form of dreams. In temple healing rituals, a patient might sleep inside a sacred chamber, hoping to receive a vision from a god. These dreams could be symbolic or literal, offering guidance or cure. The practice is called incubation, and it's a blend of medicine and mysticism that predates even ancient Greece. One famous tale from a later period tells of a man suffering from blindness who slept in the temple of Imhotep, the deified architect turned healer from earlier times. In the dream, Imhotep appeared and placed medicine on the man's eyes. When he awoke, he could see again. Historians still debate whether the veneration of healing gods was central to actual treatment or a cultural cushion for when medicine failed. After all, when the herbs didn't work, it helped to have a god to blame or beg. But even today, spiritual practices linger in medicine. We still talk about the healing power of faith. Hospitals still have chapels, and many still pray over their loved ones' recovery. In ancient Egypt, healing was never just about the body. It was about aligning oneself with divine will, about restoring not just balance in the bloodstream, but harmony in the universe. You didn't just want the doctor's opinion, you wanted Sekhmet's forgiveness, Thoth's wisdom, and Isis's gentle hand, and with that team on your side, well, even a crocodile bite didn't seem so bad. Toothache and crocodile dung, the humble toothache. A universal nuisance, timeless, throbbing, and always showing up at the worst possible moment. Today, we'd call a dentist and have them poke around with steel tools and Novocaine. But if you lived in ancient Egypt and woke up with your molar pulsing like a war drum, well, get ready for onions, prayers, and just a touch of crocodile dung. Let's begin with some context. Ancient Egyptians really cared about their teeth, which is ironic because their dental health was notoriously terrible. The sand that drifted into their flour from grinding stones made bread a gritty affair. Over time, it wore down teeth so severely that many Egyptians, even nobles, died with jaws full of abscesses, ground down molars, and exposed nerves. If your diet consists of stone-dusted carbs and desert wines, you're going to need a good oral hygiene plan. Unfortunately, toothbrushes and floss hadn't been invented yet. So, what did they use? Well, one common treatment for toothache included crushed onions, powdered ochre, and beer, a kind of primitive dental paste. They'd mash it all together, apply it to the aching area, and whisper a spell to Horus or Thoth, hoping the divine would intervene where medicine might not. But the real kicker, one variation of a remedy involved crocodile dung. That's right. Some prescriptions called for dried reptile droppings to be mixed with ingredients like incense, honey, or resin and then placed directly onto the inflamed gums. Because obviously, nothing soothes pain like a mouthful of now monster poop. The logic, if we can call it that, was based partly on symbolic reasoning. Crocodiles were powerful animals associated with Sobek, a fearsome god who protected people and occasionally devoured them. Using part of the crocodile may have been seen as channeling Sobek's strength to expel evil spirits believed to be causing the pain. The dung may have also had mild antibacterial properties, though let's be honest, they were probably guessing. Still, not all remedies were quite so fragrant. The Egyptians also relied on frankincense, myrrh, and honey, ingredients that we now know have real antimicrobial effects. Honey, in particular, was a favorite treatment. It was smeared onto sore gums, abscesses, and wounds because it helped kill bacteria and promote healing. It also tasted better than crocodile dung. Then there was the mystical element. A toothache wasn't just physical, it might be the result of an evil spirit living in your jaw. Some spells called for placing an amulet on the head or neck to ward off the offending presence. Others involved reciting phrases like, "Come out, you who dwell in the root. I banish you in the name of Horus, the clean-mouthed." Not exactly dental surgery, but probably satisfying to shout when you're in pain. Interestingly, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a more practical medical text from the same era, avoids some of the more magical approaches. It treats injuries and abscesses with bandages, splints, and poultices, suggesting that some doctors were already leaning toward observation-based treatment. But the majority of common folk likely relied on local healers, who combined whatever they had on hand, herbs, prayers, and whatever the Nile coughed up that week. The big question, of course, is, did any of it work? Surprisingly, some of it probably did. The antimicrobial qualities of honey, the soothing effects of oils and herbs, and even the placebo power of a well-delivered spell could have provided relief. And as strange as the ingredients seemed to us, they were part of a coherent worldview, one in which pain had both physical and spiritual causes, and healing meant treating both. Historians still debate whether some ingredients were actually applied or whether they were symbolic. Did anyone really put crocodile dung on their molars? Or was it metaphorical, meant to frighten off evil forces? Some Egyptologists suggest these prescriptions were partly ritualistic, intended to make the patient feel spiritually protected, even if the real benefit came from rest and honey. So, the next time you groan about waiting 2 weeks to see the dentist, just imagine squatting in the corner of a reed hut, watching a man in linen grind crocodile pellets while reciting prayers to a falcon-headed god. Suddenly, that dentist office with cheesy music and mini rinse doesn't seem so bad, does it? And hey, at least they weren't using hippo bile. Though, they totally did, but we'll save that for another section. Heart, not brain. If you were to ask an ancient Egyptian where your thoughts come from, your dreams, your ideas, even your sneaky plan to sneak extra figs after dinner, they wouldn't point to your head. Nope. They'd press a hand over your chest and say, quite seriously, it's the heart. To the Egyptians, the heart was everything. It was the seat of emotion, intellect, memory, personality, and conscience. The brain, just a bit of useless filler behind the eyes. Squishy, gray, and completely unimportant. In fact, during mummification, the brain was usually pulled out through the nose and thrown away. Yes, discarded. Meanwhile, the heart was carefully preserved in the chest cavity, or sometimes in a special jar if things got complicated. Because in the afterlife, you'd need it. The logic came partly from observation. When someone felt something deeply, fear, love, anger, their chest pounded, the heart thudded. It felt like that's where the you lived. And without the benefit of dissections or modern anatomy, there was no reason to think otherwise. The brain didn't seem to do much, other than ooze unpleasantly when cracked open. The heart, however, was felt every day. This belief wasn't just philosophical, it shaped medicine. Egyptian doctors focused their attention on the heart and its many channels. According to the Ebers Papyrus, the body contained 42 vessels radiating from the heart, carrying air, blood, mucus, tears, and spirits. That's right, spiritual energy was just another substance that coursed through your insides, right along with all the squishy stuff. When someone got sick, it was believed that one of these channels might be blocked, polluted, or possessed by an evil force. So treatments were often designed to open the heart or calm the heart. This could mean anything from applying a poultice to the chest, to ingesting herbs that soothed the body, to chanting spells that would quiet the troubled soul within. And remember, The Egyptian worldview was all about balance between gods and mortals, day and night, health and disease. The heart, in many ways, was the keeper of that balance. It wasn't just a pump, it was a moral compass. This idea reached its full flowering in Egyptian funerary beliefs. In the Hall of Two Truths, during the afterlife judgment ceremony, the deceased's heart was placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, congratulations, your soul moved on to eternal paradise. If it was heavier, well, Amit, the part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus beast, would devour it. No second chances because of this. Preserving the heart was a matter of spiritual survival. Some mummies have been found with amulets shaped like hearts or scarabs placed over the chest just in case the original organ didn't make the cut. Others were buried with spells instructing the heart not to betray them at judgment. A famous line from the Book of the Dead reads, "O my heart of my mother, O my heart while I existed upon earth, do not stand up against me as a witness." That's a lot of emotional baggage for one organ. Now, let's address the brain again. Egyptian embalmers removed it using long metal hooks, liquefying and draining it through the nose, a process called exarberation. It was messy, time-consuming, and deemed necessary only because you didn't want it to stink up the tomb. Its complete absence from almost all medical papyri speaks volumes. In contrast, entire sections were devoted to the heart, its rhythms, its changes, its ailments. Modern historians are fascinated by this emphasis. It's a vivid example of how culture shapes science. The Egyptians weren't foolish, they were observant and systematic. They simply lacked tools to see the internal world with precision. They used metaphor and intuition. And, in a way, their belief in the heart as the core of the self, and so strange. Even now, we say heartbreak, open-hearted, and follow your heart. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians knew the brain had function, but ignored it for spiritual reasons, or whether it truly seemed inert and unimportant. Either way, they put their faith in the heartbeat, not the head. So next time you feel something deep in your chest, whether joy, sorrow, or that funny flutter before sleep, think of the ancient Egyptians. They nod solemnly and say, "Ah yes, your heart is speaking." And perhaps, in their own mysterious way, they were right. A magical diagnosis. Picture this. You've got a fever. Your stomach's acting strange, and your limbs feel heavy. In today's world, you'd book an appointment, get poked with a thermometer, maybe have some blood drawn, and end up with a prescription. But in ancient Egypt, your doctor might diagnose you by reading your pulse, observing the stars, and maybe asking if you recently offended any spirits. Welcome to the mystical world of Egyptian diagnosis, where medicine met magic and symptoms were often just whispers from the invisible realm. A typical diagnostic session began with close physical observation. The physician, usually trained in a temple's house of life, would examine the patient's pulse, skin color, posture, breathing, and even the way they spoke. This wasn't superstition, it was the beginnings of empirical observation. For instance, one section of the Ebers Papyrus includes detailed instructions for feeling a patient's pulse and interpreting it like the flow of the Nile. If it beat too quickly or too weakly, Something was clearly out of balance. But here's where it gets extra dreamy. After this basic examination, the doctor might consult omens, dreams, or the will of the gods. They might ask the patient about their recent behaviors. Have they been near a forbidden tomb, touched a sacred animal, eaten something during an unlucky hour? All of these could be the root of illness. Then came the divinatory tools. Some healers carried special amulets or rods said to reveal hidden knowledge. Others used dream interpretation, believing that visions during sleep could uncover the source of suffering. Still others observed the flight of birds or cast drops of oil in water, watching the way the patterns formed. Think of it as a combination of early diagnostics and a gentle seance. One diagnostic spell reads, "If the patient's ears are warm and his breath smells of onions, then the demon of Sekhmet dwells in his throat." Recite the spell of release and rub the throat with milk of the sacred cow. In this view, disease was not always from within. It might be caused by an external force, like a malicious spirit, a wind of illness, or the wrath of a displeased deity. So part of the diagnostic process was determining who or what had afflicted the patient. Was it a mistaken diet, a cursed object, a punishment for a broken taboo? This magical element didn't mean the Egyptians ignored physical symptoms. In fact, some papyri show surprising diagnostic accuracy. There are entries describing conditions that sound a lot like diabetes, epilepsy, and arthritis. One passage outlines symptoms of stroke, noting the body falls, the face turns to one side, and the mouth drools. Not bad for 3,500 years ago. But once the cause was identified, natural or supernatural, the physician would prescribe treatment based on both realms. For a physical ailment, you might get honey, resin, castor oil, or a warm compress. For a spiritual one, the treatment could include an incantation, an amulet, or a purification ritual involving natron and sacred water. One spell for healing reads, "I conjure you, sickness, in the name of Thoth, leave this body, for you are not welcome. As Ra casts darkness from his path, so I cast you from this flesh." Imagine lying on a mat of woven reeds, the scent of frankincense swirling above, while a priest whispers such words and places cool poultices on your chest. It sounds like a combination of a visit and bedtime story. Interestingly, there was also a form of prognosis. Egyptian doctors would sometimes offer their version of "you're going to be fine" or "this might not end well." The Edwin Smith Papyrus classifies cases into 3 types. A disease I will treat, a disease I will contend with, a disease not to be treated. The last one is haunting. It meant the healer believed death was near, and no magic or medicine would help. Still, even in those cases, the patient might be comforted with rituals for safe passage into the afterlife. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians saw illness more as a physical malfunction or a spiritual disturbance. The answer seems to be both. They didn't separate body and soul the way we do. Every pain had both a material cause and a cosmic implication. And honestly, who's to say they were wrong? After all, don't we still look for meaning in our illnesses? We ask why something happened. We talk about healing energy and good vibes. Maybe the Egyptians simply said it more poetically and with more crocodile charms. So, if you ever wake in the night feeling unwell, Just remember, in ancient Egypt, someone would have placed their fingers to your wrist, whispered the name of a god, and told you whether your stomachache was from spoiled figs or a mischievous spirit hiding in your spleen. Moldy bread as antibiotic. All right, close your eyes and imagine this scene. A soft breeze rustles through a Nile-side clinic, incense smoke curls toward the ceiling, and a healer gently presses a slice of moldy bread onto a festering wound. You might instinctively cringe. But hold on, because what sounds like a bad idea might actually have been one of ancient Egypt's most miraculous medical insights. Yes, we're talking about moldy bread, the go-to bandage for infected cuts, boils, and skin irritations. It sounds unappetizing and probably smelled worse, but there's a twist. Thousands of years before Louis Pasteur and Alexander Fleming revolutionized our understanding of bacteria and antibiotics, the Egyptians were already applying naturally antibiotic substances. Without microscopes, without petri dishes, just intuition, tradition, and, perhaps, some lucky accidents. The recipe was surprisingly simple. Bread was left out to collect mold, then ground, mixed with honey or fat, and applied directly to wounds. Some variations added copper salts or resin for extra punch. The concoction was placed beneath linen bandages and left to draw out the infection. Today, we call that an antiseptic poultice. Back then, it was a mix of prayer and practice. Let's get scientific for just a moment. Certain molds like Penicillium species naturally produce compounds that kill bacteria. Honey, meanwhile, contains hydrogen peroxide and has a low pH, making it a hostile environment for microbial growth. In modern wound care, both are still used, especially in medicinal-grade honey dressings for burns and ulcers. So, while the Egyptians didn't know the word bacteria, they clearly knew what worked. How did they discover it? That's one of those delightful historical mysteries. Maybe a healer noticed a dirty bandage led to faster healing. Maybe someone accidentally used moldy food in desperation and saw the wound improve. Or maybe they observed how wounds treated with sweet, sticky substances fared better than those left dry and exposed. There are references in both the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri to wound care that include moldy substances, though not all are as explicit as apply green fuzz. For example, prepare a poultice of old bread and grease. Place upon the sore, that it may heal. Recite the words of Thoth, and bind with fresh linen. It's understated, but telling. The real magic is how these treatments were packaged. Egyptian medicine never separated science from the spiritual. A wound wasn't just a tear in flesh, it was a breach in cosmic harmony. So, you didn't just need moldy bread, you needed moldy bread, properly blessed, wrapped in linen while invoking Horus. That last part, it might seem like ritual, but in many ways, it increased the patient's trust in the healing process. And trust, as any modern placebo researcher will tell you, is powerful. Interestingly, many modern scholars have tried to replicate ancient Egyptian remedies, and some have held up shockingly well. Honey dressings, onion poultices, and yes, even moldy bread compresses have shown antimicrobial effects in controlled tests. It's not hospital-grade medicine, but it's far from nonsense. Of course, not all their wound treatments were winners. Some involved crocodile fat, others included animal excrement, and a few had you sleep with a mouse tied to your foot. So let's not give them too much credit. Still, it's remarkable that amid all the charms and chants, there was a thread of practical observation. Egyptian healers didn't just throw things at the wall. They recorded results. They passed down remedies that worked. And moldy bread that once stuck around. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians understood mold's role in healing or if its effect was purely coincidental. There's no record of them isolating active compounds, but in a way, their success without scientific tools might be more impressive than our modern methods. They were experimenting blind, and sometimes they got it beautifully right. So next time you toss out stale bread, just pause for a moment and remember that blue-green fuzz might once have saved someone's life along the Nile. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. Moldy, but beautiful. Surgery with flint tools. Let's take a deep breath now. Imagine lying still on a woven mat, under the flickering light of oil lamps. A priest-physician leans over you with focused eyes, steady hands, and in them not a scalpel of shining steel, but a sharp, carefully honed flint blade. Yes, friends, tonight we're talking surgery. Ancient Egyptian style. It might sound alarming, but ancient Egyptians did perform basic surgical procedures, and they weren't entirely bad at it. In fact, for a civilization that didn't have metal scalpels, bronze came later. Anesthesia, or germ theory, their approach was, dare we say, remarkably advanced, and often surprisingly successful. They understood that sometimes prayer and poultices just weren't enough. Wounds needed to be cleaned, drained, stitched, or even lanced. Tumors needed to be cut away. Broken bones needed to be set and immobilized. All of this was done using sharp obsidian and flint tools, sometimes bronze in later periods, and with instruments that modern archaeologists have unearthed in tombs: forceps, hooks, clamps, probes, and knives. The most important source on Egyptian surgery is the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a remarkable text dating to around 1600 BCE, though likely copied from an even older source. It reads less like a spellbook and more like a field manual. It documents 48 cases of trauma and surgical scenarios, from skull fractures to dislocated shoulders, and describes diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment for each. Let's peek inside. Case 29, for example, is about a gaping head wound. It reads, "If thou examinest a man having a wound in his temple, penetrating to the bone, smashing his skull, thou shouldst lay him prostrate on his back, apply fresh meat the first day, and bind with linen thereafter." Fresh meat. That's not dinner, it's a method of keeping the wound moist and clean, and possibly preventing infection. They'd later replace it with linen and apply a paste of honey and resin, and they would monitor the patient closely, checking pulse, breathing, and behavior. That's triage, folks. But make no mistake, this wasn't delicate, painless surgery. There was no anesthetic beyond possibly beer, wine, or opium-based herbs. Pain management was a prayer and a stiff drink. Still, their survival rates were surprisingly good, especially with head injuries. You see, the Egyptians had a secret weapon: mummification. Thanks to the embalming process, Their knowledge of internal anatomy was far ahead of many other ancient cultures. They knew the location of organs, the shape of bones, and how to remove a brain with an iron hook, though, as we know, they didn't think it mattered much. Embalmers weren't doctors per se, but their work informed the healing arts. Surgery wasn't limited to trauma, either. Evidence suggests that Egyptians performed incisions to remove abscesses, drained pus, and even cauterized wounds using heated metal. A rare and risky practice, but sometimes necessary. They also set broken bones with splints and bandages, often coated in gum or resin to harden and hold the limb steady. And if you're wondering about the tools, here's a peek at their surgical starter kit. Flint blades, incredibly sharp and precise, even rivaling modern scalpels in cutting ability. Bronze hooks and forceps, to grasp tissue or remove debris. Linen bandages, for wrapping, often pre-soaked in antiseptic solutions. Honey and resin, for dressing wounds. Surgical needles. Yes, they stitched wounds shut using thread made of plant fiber or sinew. Were they performing open-heart surgery? No. Brain surgery? Unlikely. But minor procedures? Absolutely. Some skeletons show signs of trepanation, the drilling of holes into the skull to relieve pressure or treat head injuries, and some individuals survive the procedure long enough for bone to regrow. Still, it wasn't all sharp instruments and calm hands. Many procedures included magical rites, such as invoking the power of Sekhmet or Heka to protect the patient. A flint blade might be blessed before making the first incision. A chant might be whispered as the wound was stitched. It wasn't just about cutting, it was about restoring harmony to the body and the spirit. Historians still debate how widespread surgery was outside temple clinics. Were rural healers performing these techniques, or were they confined to the elite centers of Thebes and Memphis? Evidence is scarce, but what remains is clear. Egyptian physicians knew how to operate, and they documented their craft with clarity, care, and even a touch of humility. One passage from the Edwin Smith papyrus ends simply with, "If thou treatest him, he will die." Sometimes, the best a doctor could offer was honesty. So the next time you shiver at the thought of a paper cut, imagine a world where your wound is cleaned with wine, covered with moldy bread, and gently stitched by a man in a linen kilt using a flint blade, and where the gods are silently watching, ready to bless or curse the outcome. Sleep tight. Eye infections and honey. Let's gently ease our way into one of the most delicate and oddly delightful corners of ancient Egyptian medicine, the eyes. In a land of blinding sun, swirling desert sands, and now-born parasites, eye problems weren't just common, they were practically inevitable. And so, the Egyptians became connoisseurs of ocular care, and their go-to cure, that golden, glistening nectar of the gods, honey. Yes, before there were drops, creams, or laser surgery, there was a dab of honey and a whispered prayer to Horus. Why honey? Well, aside from being delicious on flatbread, honey is one of the oldest natural antibiotics known to humanity. It contains hydrogen peroxide, has a low pH, and creates an environment where bacteria just don't thrive. Modern studies have confirmed what the Egyptians figured out millennia ago. Honey is remarkably effective against infections, especially on soft tissue like the eyes, and the Egyptians had a lot of eye problems. Conditions like trachoma, a bacterial infection that can cause blindness, conjunctivitis, styes, and even parasites were widespread. The dry, dusty climate and lack of modern hygiene didn't help. But what they lacked in eye wash stations, they made up for in ingenuity. Their treatments ranged from brilliantly effective to profoundly questionable. One common remedy was to mix honey with crushed minerals like malachite, green copper carbonate, or galena, a lead-based compound, and apply it like a paste or kohl eyeliner. It sounds alarming, but this paste had mild antiseptic properties, and the eyeliner may have even helped deflect sunlight and reduce infection. So, yes, the original cat eye may have started as medical care. One particularly elegant formula from the Ebers papyrus reads, "For the eyes, blend honey with red ochre. Apply to the corner of the eyes for 3 mornings. Speak the words of healing as you do. Simple, gentle, sweet, and the words of healing." Well, that's where things get dreamy. Many remedies included incantations, often poetic, invoking deities associated with sight and clarity. The most famous, Horus, the falcon-headed sky god who lost an eye in a battle with Set, that I was later magically restored, making him a patron of healing and vision. Amulets in the shape of the eye of Horus, also called wajet, were worn for protection, not just of health, but of spiritual perception. They appeared everywhere, around necks, painted on tomb walls, carved into coffins. The eye wasn't just an organ, it was a symbol of cosmic balance, the very act of seeing as a sacred experience. Not all eye treatments were quite so charming. Some included bat blood, lizard fat, or fish bile, ingredients less validated by science and more by hope. One remedy involved applying a mixture of donkey liver and frankincense, while another instructed the healer to recite spells over a bowl of natron, a natural salt, and then rinse the patient's eyes with it. Saline, as it turns out, isn't a bad idea, but donkey liver, that might be pushing it. Despite the occasional gross out, Egyptian ophthalmology had structure and method. Physicians specialized in eye care. They were even given the title Eyes of the King if they served the royal household. And in the Edwin Smith papyrus, we see descriptions of eye injuries, from blunt trauma to swelling, with careful steps for treatment. They also understood that eye infections could spread, and had routines to clean the eyes and lids regularly. Some temples had fountains or basins where ritual washing took place. There's even evidence of early surgical interventions, like lancing styes or draining abscesses, though done with tools more suited to pottery than precision. Historians still debate whether the kohl-lined eyes of Egyptian statues were meant to reflect medical knowledge or simply fashion. Likely both. In a world where symbolism and health were inseparable, looking good and staying healthy were one and the same. So picture it. A patient reclines under a palm tree, eyes closed. A healer gently dabs honey mixed with powdered stone beneath the lashes. A chant is spoken, birds chirp softly nearby, and somewhere in the breeze, you can almost hear the falcon wings of Horus stirring the air. It's medicine, sure, but it's also a little bit magic. The professional healer. Not all doctors in ancient Egypt were created equal. In fact, being a physician in this golden land of gods, grain, and Grand Pyramids was less like being a back alley herbalist and more like joining a sacred order, complete with ranks, titles, and a whole lot of reverence. These weren't just people who knew their way around a poultice, they were scholars, temple initiates, even members of the royal court. The term for a physician was swanu, a word that pops up in tomb inscriptions and temple walls, often followed by their specialization. Yes, specializations existed. There were doctors for the eyes, doctors for the belly, doctors for the anus, ancient proctology, and even doctors for women and children. This level of detail shows a healthcare system that wasn't just reactive, but organized and professional. Training took place in the House of Life, a temple institution that doubled as a medical school and research center. Students memorized scrolls of medical recipes, anatomy notes with a lot of creative guesses, and magical spells for good measure. It wasn't just about treating the body, it was about aligning with divine truth. A healer had to know how to speak to the gods and to the flesh. Once trained, a doctor might work in temples, treating priests and initiates, military units, patching up soldiers, villages, serving as the local healer, the royal court, reserved for the elite few considered physicians of the great house. These top doctors could be incredibly respected. Some were even buried in tombs with elaborate inscriptions, praising their healing powers and kindness. Imagine having your own mini pyramid because you were great at treating snake bites and toothaches. They also followed a kind of ethical code, though not the formal Hippocratic oath we think of today. Still, many scrolls stress that a doctor should observe, diagnose, treat, and only promise help when appropriate. The Edwin Smith Papyrus even distinguishes treatable cases from hopeless ones, showing a degree of medical realism rarely seen in ancient times. One swanu, named Besehet, is believed to be the first known female doctor in history. Her title, Lady Overseer of Female Physicians, is carved into her tomb. Her legacy reminds us that medicine in Egypt wasn't strictly male-dominated, and that healing was seen as a divine gift not bound by gender. Historians still debate how much freedom these doctors had to innovate or whether they followed medical texts rigidly. It's likely that most followed tradition closely but adapted based on observation, combining what they read with what they saw, kind of like reading a cookbook, then tweaking the recipe because your patient's fresh turned blue. In all, the Egyptian healer wasn't just a technician. He or she was a bridge between heaven and earth, balancing sacred knowledge with hands-on care, wielding both scalpel and spell. And in that soft twilight between science and faith, the patient found relief not just for their symptoms, but for their soul. Pregnancy tests with barley. Now here's a section that's going to make your modern pregnancy test stick look a little boring. If you were an ancient Egyptian woman wondering whether you were expecting, you wouldn't head to a pharmacy or pee on a plastic wand. No, you'd go grab a handful of barley, some wheat, and a clay pot, because in this world, the grain knew before you did. Here's how it worked. The method is described in the Berlin Papyrus around 1350 BCE and goes something like this. Take 2 small pots, one filled with barley, the other with emmer wheat. The woman would urinate on both pots every day. If either sprouted, it meant she was pregnant. If neither sprouted, she was probably not. And here's the kicker. If the barley sprouted faster, they predicted she was having a boy. If the wheat sprouted first, a girl. Yes, a gender reveal with grains, long before blue cupcakes or pink balloons. Now, you're probably wondering, did it work? Surprisingly, sort of. In 1963, researchers actually tested the method. It turns out that estrogen in the urine of pregnant women can promote seed germination more effectively than urine from non-pregnant women. So, while it wasn't foolproof, it may have offered a reasonable early clue, especially compared to just waiting for the bump to show up. This grain-based method wasn't just clever. It reflects how Egyptians thought about life, fertility, and nature. Pregnancy wasn't a clinical condition, it was a cosmic event, a blending of body and universe. Seeds sprouting from water symbolized the creation of life, just like babies growing in wombs. The act of peeing on a pot of barley became part of a greater ritual of divine observation. They didn't stop there. The medical papyri include dozens of remedies and tests for fertility, conception, and childbirth. Some sound soothing like herbal infusions of dates and honey. Others are more alarming. One fertility test involved inserting onion juice into the vagina and checking if the scent reached the nose by morning. If it did, congratulations, you were considered fertile. If it didn't, well, back to the barley. Midwives also used amulets and charms to protect pregnant women, invoking gods like Thoth, the hippo goddess of childbirth, and Bes, the dwarf god who scared off evil spirits with a permanent scowl. These gods were often painted on bedroom walls or carved onto birthing stools. Historians still debate whether Egyptian pregnancy tests were widespread or limited to temple medicine. But what's clear is this: even in matters as intimate as reproduction, the Egyptians found beauty, symbolism, and surprising insight. So next time someone tells you ancient medicine was all nonsense, remind them, 3,000 years ago, someone peed on some barley and kind of nailed it. Demons in the belly. Close your eyes and imagine this. You're lying curled up on a reed mat, clutching your stomach in agony, and a priest doctor is leaning over you, whispering a spell while sprinkling beer around your body in a wide circle. He's not looking for symptoms, he's hunting a demon that's made your belly its home. Welcome to one of the most curious and frankly unsettling ideas in ancient Egyptian medicine, that illness could be caused by spirits, demons, or even invisible creatures dwelling inside the body. The Egyptians didn't have microscopes or germ theory. They didn't know about E. coli or gut flora. But they were deeply observant, and when someone's belly bloated, or churned, or made odd gurgling noises, they concluded something must be living inside. Something malevolent, something squirmy. This idea wasn't unique to Egypt. Other ancient cultures, including Mesopotamia and India, also believed in spiritual invaders causing sickness, but the Egyptians gave these entities names, characteristics, and sometimes even illustrations in their texts. Some were described as small creatures with claws and sharp teeth. Others were snake-like or worm-like. One was called the eater of entrails and was blamed for abdominal cramps. To treat these unwanted tenants, healers turned to a mix of herbal medicine and spiritual warfare. A classic remedy might go like this: crush carob seeds, Mix with beer and honey, and drink at dawn. Recite, "Come out, demon," for the smell of the sweet beer drives you away. In other cases, enemas were used to flush out the invading spirit. The Egyptians were pioneers of enemas, using reeds and water or oils to cleanse the digestive tract. The logic: if the demon couldn't be exorcised by spells, it might be encouraged to leave forcefully. Of course, not all belly issues were blamed on spirits. Some were linked to improper food, spoiled offerings, or even bad timing eating during certain unlucky hours. But when an illness was persistent, mysterious, and painful, the supernatural explanation took over. These treatments weren't just physical, they were rituals. Patients might be smudged with incense, washed in Nile water, or wrapped in protective linens inscribed with spells. They might wear amulets engraved with images of horse-slaying serpents, or of Bess dancing to scare the demons away. Historians still debate how seriously the Egyptians took these explanations. Were they metaphorical ways to describe internal suffering or literal beliefs? Maybe both. But to the patient, whether it was a parasite or a poltergeist, the result was the same. They were in pain, and they needed relief. So next time you clutch your stomach after a questionable meal, just be glad you don't need an exorcism or an enema from a reed tube. Herbal lore. Now let's step into a garden, not just any garden, but one bursting with healing secrets, where lotus blossoms shimmer, mint dances in the breeze, and baskets of herbs lie ready to become cures. For the ancient Egyptians, the world was a living pharmacy, and plants were some of their most treasured allies. The Ebers Papyrus alone lists over 700 herbal remedies, and many of these have echoes in traditional medicine to this day. Egyptians didn't just collect herbs, they grew them in temple gardens, dried them carefully, ground them into powders, and mixed them with honey, wine, milk, or oils. The results were ointments, pills, poultices, teas, and sometimes pastes that looked more like cake batter than anything medical. Let's explore some of their most beloved botanicals. Aloe vera, used for skin irritation and burns, yes, exactly like today. Garlic, a favorite for treating infections, fatigue, and even bad air. Frankincense and myrrh, both used as antiseptics and in treatments for wounds and gum disease. Pomegranate, a powerful remedy for intestinal parasites. Its rind was brewed into tea or ground into pills. Fenugreek, used for fever and chest pain. Juniper berries, to ease digestion and cleanse the body. Castor oil, as a potent laxative. Some things never change. These herbs weren't just mixed and applied. They were often blessed or combined with ritual, making each dose a sacred experience. A salve for a headache might be applied while chanting a verse to Thoth. A tea for a troubled stomach might be sipped in the light of the moon. With amulets resting nearby, the herbalists, often women or priestesses, kept recipes passed down through generations, like family secrets. Some remedies even included precise measurements, instructions on how long to boil or soak, and warnings about toxicity. There was a science here, even if it wore a robe of mysticism, but not every plant was safe. The Egyptians were aware of poisonous herbs, too. Certain treatments for skin lesions or impure blood included toxic resins that needed to be used with great caution. This shows a clear understanding of dosage and balance and the fine line between healing and harm. What's more, herbal medicine was gender inclusive. Women, especially midwives and temple workers, were deeply involved in cultivating and using these plants. Some were even called overseers of healing gardens. Historians still debate how effective these remedies were, but many ingredients like garlic, honey, and myrrh have confirmed antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory properties. And while some mixtures were pure wishful thinking, were looking at you, lizard ash, others were remarkably practical. So imagine a sick child sipping warm tea made from dates, figs, and crushed anise seeds, while their mother whispers blessings over them. It wasn't just medicine, it was a ceremony of care, steeped in sun and spirit. The embalmer's wisdom. When you think of medical advancement, mummification might not be the first thing that comes to mind. But for the ancient Egyptians, the art of preserving the dead was also a lesson in anatomy, and some of their greatest knowledge of the human body came not from surgeries, but from centuries of embalmers wrapping kings and commoners alike. Let's be clear, embalmers weren't usually doctors. They were specialized craftsmen and priests, trained in one of Egypt's most sacred rituals. But over time, their hands-on work gave them a practical understanding of internal organs, even if their explanations didn't always match reality. For example, embalmers knew the liver, stomach, intestines, and lungs could be removed and placed in canopic jars. The heart was the seat of emotion and was usually left inside the body unless there were complications. The brain was extracted through the nose and discarded. No respect for the brain again. The kidneys and pancreas, often ignored, but occasionally noted in later papyri. Through this practice, embalmers learned where things were, how to access them, and what they felt like. They may not have known how organs functioned, but they knew how to identify them, which is more than many ancient cultures could claim. This knowledge didn't stay isolated. Over time, temple doctors and embalmers likely exchanged insights, one preserving bodies, the other trying to preserve life. The overlap might explain why certain surgical procedures appear so informed. Embalming also gave rise to the use of resins, natron salts, and essential oils, many of which found their way into medical treatments. The antiseptic qualities of these substances made them effective not just for preserving flesh, but for healing wounds, too. And let's not forget the ritual element. The dissection of a body was sacred and symbolic, meant to prepare the deceased for rebirth in the afterlife. This spiritual lens meant that anatomy wasn't just physical, it was cosmic. Each organ had meaning. Each action had purpose. Historians still debate how much of this anatomical knowledge fed directly into Egyptian medicine. But there's little doubt the embalmers, in their quiet workrooms filled with linen, oils, and prayers, helped build a body of knowledge that shaped the healer's art for centuries. So, the next time you marvel at a preserved mummy in a museum, think of it not just as a historical curiosity but as a silent teacher, a body that once helped the living understand themselves. Public health and cleanliness. Take a deep breath. The air smells of lotus blossoms and maybe just a hint of incense. You walk along a well-swept street near the Nile, where homes are made of mud brick and walls are painted with scenes of daily life. Surprisingly, it doesn't smell too bad. In fact, it smells fresh. Welcome to the surprisingly sanitized world of ancient Egypt. While the ancient Egyptians didn't have soap as we know it, or sewers like the Romans, they took cleanliness incredibly seriously. To them, being clean wasn't just about physical health, it was a moral and spiritual duty. Clean bodies, clean homes, clean temples. A clean person was a person in balance, in harmony with the gods. So, what did cleanliness look like in 1500 BCE? Let's begin with bathing. Egyptians bathed regularly daily, if they could afford it, using water from the Nile, basins in courtyards, or large ceramic tubs. Wealthier households had full bathing rooms with drains and jars of scented oils. The working class simply poured water over themselves from jars, often while standing on a flat stone. Soap, not quite. They used a kind of paste made from animal fat and alkaline salts, which foamed when mixed with water. Think of it as a rudimentary body wash, effective, though not exactly lavender scented. After bathing, Egyptians applied perfumed oils to their skin. These weren't just for smelling good. Many oils had antibacterial properties and helped protect against the sun. Myrrh, frankincense, and castor oil were favorites. Even hair was oiled and styled. Lice, a known problem, but shaved heads and wigs were an effective and stylish solution. Let's not forget clothing. Clean, white linen was the norm, and priests, they took it to the next level, bathing several times a day, shaving all body hair, and wearing freshly laundered robes before performing any ritual. Cleanliness was a requirement for touching the divine. But what about the other kind of hygiene? Toilets, they existed. Wealthy homes had simple stone or ceramic seats, placed over clay pots or pits. Commoners used public latrines or went to the edges of fields. Toilet paper, not quite sand, water, or smooth pottery shards were likely used. It sounds unpleasant, but in the dry Egyptian climate, pathogens didn't spread as quickly as they might in other parts of the world. More importantly, the Egyptians had a strong sense of waste management. They dug refuse pits outside cities. They used ash and sand to cover messes. In temples and palaces, special workers cleaned constantly, even on building sites. Archaeologists have found evidence of designated latrine areas. Water. The Nile was sacred, and water from it was carefully handled. People filtered it through linen cloth before drinking, and boiled it when possible. Wells and cisterns helped store clean water during dry seasons. And in the realm of medicine, cleanliness played a central role. Wounds were washed with beer, vinegar, or natron, and tools were often heated or anointed with oils before use. Bandages were made of freshly washed linen, and healing spaces were kept orderly. It wasn't sterile by modern standards, but it was far from reckless. What's most remarkable is how this commitment to cleanliness was deeply tied to religion. To be clean was to be worthy of divine protection. Dirt wasn't just gross, it was spiritually dangerous. Many healing spells even began with purification rites. A dirty body invited chaos. A clean one welcomed Mat, the goddess of order and harmony. Historians still debate whether this cleanliness helped Egyptians avoid disease or if it was simply spiritual practice. but the archaeological evidence well-preserved drains, soap residues, oil jars, and orderly latrines suggest that hygiene was practical, not just pious. So as you tuck yourself in tonight, just imagine the care with which a priest might bathe before dawn, how a mother might oil her child's skin with frankincense, or how a village healer might scrub her hands with natron before preparing a poultice. All small acts quiet, repetitive, gentle but deeply meaningful. And perhaps that's what public health really is, a collection of tiny rituals performed every day, not just to fight illness, but to honor life. Animal medicine. Now imagine the room grows a little darker, lit only by the glow of an oil lamp. A clay bowl simmers gently over a low fire. In it, the fat of a crocodile swirls with bits of donkey hair, a trace of lizard blood, and a few drops of goat's milk. To our modern noses, it smells curious, but to an ancient Egyptian healer, this was medicine crafted with care, intention, and a splash of the Nile's wildest creatures. Yes, welcome to the world of animal medicine, where some of the most revered cures came not from plants or prayers, but from the beasts, birds, and bugs that shared the land with them. In ancient Egypt, the boundary between human and animal was never sharply drawn. Animals weren't just food or labor, they were messengers of the gods, living embodiments of divine qualities. So, when you used part of an animal in a cure, you weren't just applying grease or bone, you were borrowing power. Let's explore the pharmacy of fur, feather, and fang. Crocodile fat, believed to have protective powers, especially against infection and evil spirits. It was smeared on wounds or burned in incense to clear the air. Possibly pungent, possibly symbolic, possibly both. Donkey milk, highly prized as a treatment for fevers, fatigue, and stomach disorders. It was thought to be especially pure and nourishing, fit for royalty and infants alike. Cleopatra herself was rumored to bathe in it, though that may be more legend than lotion. Lizard blood and fat, used in ointments for skin disease and swelling. Lizards were seen as regenerative, almost magical, and so their bodies were infused with healing potential. Mouse paste, crushed mice, yes, really were mixed with dates and honey to treat earaches and toothaches. The idea, the vitality of a living creature might chase out the pain. Or maybe it was just a case of, let's try everything. Bee venom and honey. Bees were sacred to the Egyptians, and their honey was everywhere in medicine. But even bee stings were applied deliberately in some cases to stimulate blood flow or shock the illness out of the body. Snakes and snake skin. Parts of snakes were used in potions for joint pain and even as aphrodisiacs. The snake, after all, was a creature of transformation, shedding skin, slithering between worlds. Dangerous, yes, but also sacred. Fish oils. The fat of certain Nile fish was used in balms and laxatives. The fish goddess Hatmhit was even worshipped in the Delta region, blending aquatic life with divine healing. Dung, yes, again, from crocodiles, donkeys, and even cows. Dung was dried, powdered, or diluted into treatments. While the logic may escape us, some modern researchers have found low levels of natural antibiotics in herbivore waste. Still, not recommended for DIY use. Of course, these remedies weren't always used alone. They were often combined with herbs, oils, or wine, and applied under the watchful eye of a priest or swannel, and each ingredient carried not just physical properties, but symbolic weight. A balm made from lion fat, if you could get it, might imbue the patient with courage and strength. Vulture feathers, protection from unseen forces. Amulets also featured animal imagery: scorpions to ward off venom, falcons for sharp vision, frogs for fertility. Some were shaped from wax or clay and dissolved in water to create a sort of holy tea to the Egyptians. Animals were never just animals, they were living metaphors, sacred vessels, and occasionally walking medicine chests. Healing with animals meant aligning oneself with the natural and divine world at once. Historians still debate whether these animal-based treatments had consistent medical effects, or whether they served more ritual or psychological purposes. Likely, it was both. Some components like honey or fish oil had real benefits. Others provided comfort, awe, and spiritual reassurance. So picture a healer in the twilight, mixing donkey milk and myrrh into a warm drink, humming a prayer to Bess as she tends to a sick child. Or an old fisherman rubbing crocodile fat on a broken foot, whispering thanks to Sobek as he gazes at the moonlit Nile. It's messy, it's mythic, it's medicine. And somehow, even in the strangeness, there's something deeply human. Female doctors. Let's pause the incense and dim the torchlight, because now we're stepping into a story history often forgets. The story of the women who healed, guided births, studied scrolls, and were the title of doctor in a time long before most of the world acknowledged that such a thing was even possible. In ancient Egypt, medicine wasn't just a man's domain. Women could, and did, train as physicians, midwives, and healing specialists, some of whom even rose to high ranks within temple life and the royal household. Their presence was so accepted, so woven into the fabric of daily life, that their names appear in tombs, scrolls, and medical writings with no fanfare. Just quiet, competent authority. Let's meet one of the most remarkable, the Sekhmet, who lived during the Old Kingdom around 2500 BCE. Her tomb identifies her as Lady Overseer of Female Physicians, a title that implies both medical mastery and leadership. She likely supervised a team of women who specialized in gynecology, obstetrics, fertility care, and childhood illnesses. Women were especially trusted with female patients for reasons both practical and cultural. Topics like menstruation, childbirth, and breast health were deeply tied to ritual purity and privacy. Who better to understand these needs than another woman? Training for female healers took place in temples and houses of life. Just like their male counterparts, they would study the same medical scrolls, memorize the same spells, and learn to prepare the same poultices and oils. Some may have worked exclusively with women, while others served entire households or communities. Midwives were particularly respected. Childbirth in ancient Egypt was dangerous, no surprise there, and these women brought both knowledge and comfort. They used birth bricks, small platforms, positioned the mother in a squatting posture, and guided the baby into the world with hands experienced and calm. They chanted prayers to Taret, the protective hippo goddess, and Bes, the grumpy protector of labor and sleep. Many birth rituals involve charms and amulets, but also sound medical knowledge like rubbing oils to ease pain, checking for breech positions, and administering herbs to stop postpartum bleeding. And it didn't stop at birth. Women also provided early child care, treating colic, fevers, infections, and even conducting rudimentary fertility tests. Some were known as nurse scribes, combining the art of healing with literacy, writing down patient histories and medical notes. In tomb paintings and reliefs, we see women offering potions, applying bandages, and mixing herbs. They appear in both domestic and sacred spaces, always with poise, always in service of healing. Of course, gender equality wasn't perfect. Women still faced limits in political and legal rights. But in the realm of medicine, Egypt stood out. Greek and Roman observers later found it shocking that Egyptian women could be doctors. Yet for centuries, this was normal, ancient, and quietly revolutionary. Historians still debate how many female physicians there were and how widespread their practice was. But Paset's title alone is proof that these women weren't anomalies. They were part of a lineage, respected enough to be remembered in stone. So as you drift off tonight, imagine a calm voice reading from a scroll, soft hands anointing the sick with warm oil, and a woman in a white linen robe lighting a lamp in the darkness, a healer, teacher, and keeper of life. In a world of pharaohs and magic, she practiced something far more powerful, gentle, learned care, mental illness, and magic. Tonight, we step deeper, not into the body, but into the mind, a place even the ancient Egyptians found mysterious, powerful, and sometimes terrifying. And though they didn't have words for depression, anxiety, or psychosis the way we do today, they recognized something we're still learning to honor. The mind can suffer, just like the body. So, how did the Egyptians understand mental illness? They believed that disturbances of the mind were often spiritual in nature. A person might suddenly act strangely, cry uncontrollably, shout nonsense, or wander aimlessly, not because of trauma or neurochemical imbalance, but because the spirit had entered their body, or that a person had fallen out of harmony with the divine order. The condition might be called a wandering mind or a mind darkened by shadow. It wasn't treated as shameful. It was dangerous. Yes, but also deeply human. Treatment. It started with a mix of observation and ritual. A healer might begin by watching the patient's behavior. Were they speaking to unseen things, refusing food, shaking or twitching? Then came a diagnosis, not as a label, but as a story. Perhaps the person had encountered a cursed object, or perhaps a god was angry, or a dead ancestor had not been properly honored. And then, the remedies. Music and rhythm, harps, sistrums, rattles, and chanting were used to soothe agitation or restore balance. Sometimes, a patient would be taken to a temple and surrounded by gentle melodies, believed to realign the soul, incense and fumigation. Burning resins like frankincense or myrrh were believed to drive out evil spirits. A common ritual involved walking around the patient while swinging a censer, whispering prayers to gods like Thoth or Isis. Amulets and protective charms. A patient might wear a figurine of Bes or an eye of Horus carved from turquoise or lapis lazuli. These weren't just decorative, they were shields for the mind, anchors for the soul. Spells and invocations. healing words were powerful medicine. One spell reads, "Come forth, O mind of clarity, depart, O whisper of confusion. May the light of Ra shine in this one's thoughts." Therapeutic bathing, cleansing the body, was believed to cleanse the mind. Baths in blessed Nile water were sometimes accompanied by prayer and anointment with sacred oils. Of course, herbal remedies weren't forgotten. Poppies for sedation, blue lotus for calming, and fermented drinks for distraction were offered to ease distress. The line between a sacred potion and an ancient tranquilizer was a hazy one. Interestingly, there's little evidence of people being punished or imprisoned for mental illness. Instead, they were treated with reverence, albeit fear at times. In more severe cases, the person might be secluded in a quiet chamber, not out of cruelty, but to protect them from harmful forces or protect others from them. And what about dreams? Dreams. Egyptians believed that dreams revealed the state of the mind and soul. Temples of sleep sanatoria existed where the mentally ill could rest, dream, and receive guidance from gods. A priest might interpret the dream, offering insight or prescribing a remedy based on the symbols seen. Historians still debate how psychological these practices truly were, but in a way, their combination of music therapy, aromatherapy, counseling, and spiritual care resembles aspects of holistic mental health today. They may not have had serotonin or synapses, but they understood the importance of peace, ritual, and gentle attention. So, tonight, as your thoughts settle and sleep begins to soften the edges of your waking mind, think of those ancient healers lighting incense, whispering charms, and reminding the troubled, you are not broken, you are simply out of tune. Let us help you find your music again. Legacy of Egyptian medicine. And now we arrive at the final chamber, the quiet heart of this long, winding temple. Here, surrounded by shadows and scrolls, we ask a gentle question. What did the world remember of Egypt's healing arts? After the gods had fallen silent, the pharaohs had turned to dust, and the great houses of life had gone still, the answer, more than you might think, Egyptian medicine didn't vanish with the end of dynasties. It flowed onward, like the Nile itself, into Greece, Rome, Byzantium, and beyond. The scrolls and practices of the Swunu became part of a much wider tradition of ancient science, whispered between generations of healers, scribes, and seekers. Let's start with Imhotep, the polymath priest who served Pharaoh Djoser around 2600 BCE. He was so revered for his wisdom and healing that, centuries later, he was deified, becoming the god of medicine. Greeks living in Egypt during the Ptolemaic period equated him with their own god of healing, Asclepius, and in temples from Alexandria to Athens, his name endured. Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen were influenced by Egyptian ideas, especially in the study of anatomy, surgery, and herbalism. While they criticized the magical elements, they borrowed freely from the practical side, the methods of wound care, the use of certain plants, even the concept of specialized doctors for different body parts. Roman military medicine also reflected Egyptian techniques like bandaging wounds with honey-soaked linen or applying poultices to infected skin. In Roman Egypt, many Egyptian doctors were employed in field hospitals, bringing their millennial methods to the legions of the empire. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, Egyptian medical texts were preserved, translated, and expanded. Arab scholars like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina Avicenna studied their herbal catalogues and case-based diagnoses, helping bridge ancient thought with the emerging world of Islamic medicine. Meanwhile, back in Europe, during the Middle Ages, the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri were unknown, but the echoes of Egypt still lingered in folk medicine. The use of garlic, the binding of wounds, the belief that healing involved body and soul. In modern times, the rediscovery of these papyri in the 19th century stunned the academic world. Here was proof that, 3,000 years ago, a civilization had already recorded complex diagnoses, developed surgery, experimented with fertility tests, and even applied antibiotics long before microscopes, thermometers, or lab coats. What's even more remarkable is how much of their thinking still feels strangely familiar. We still seek balance in our bodies. We still use honey, willow bark aspirin, fennel, and garlic in medicine. We still light candles, wear lucky charms, and whisper words of hope when someone is sick. Historians still debate just how scientific ancient Egyptian medicine truly was, how much was trial and error, how much was magic in a white linen robe. But the truth is, they were trying. They watched, they recorded, they cared. And perhaps that's the most enduring part of their legacy, not the tools or the scrolls, but the gentle insistence that suffering deserves attention, that the wounded deserve dignity, and that healing is both a science and an art. So as you settle in, eyes heavy, comforted by the hush of history, imagine this: a temple by the Nile, wind whispering through palm fronds, a healer preparing a poultice by lamplight, and a patient exhaling slowly beneath a linen sheet, knowing that in the great sweep of the universe, someone is trying to help. The gentle quiet of ancient care. And now, dear dreamer, we leave behind the candle-lit halls of the house of life. The clay pots are empty, the scrolls are rolled tight and tucked away, and the incense has faded into memory like breath on cool glass. Outside, the Nile drifts silently in the moonlight. The reeds sway softly in the night breeze, whispering secrets older than language. A crocodile slides through still water, unseen. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell chimes once a low, hollow sound that seems to echo both forward and backward in time. You've walked through an entire world tonight. A world where honey healed eyes, moldy bread soothed wounds, and barley could speak the secrets of a new life. You've met priest-doctors who whispered spells while stitching wounds, women healers who read the pulse like poetry, and embalmers who, in preserving the dead, taught the living where the heart resides. It was a world of tenderness wrapped in ritual, of observation wrapped in wonder, of medicine and magic, folded together like linen bandages, sometimes messy, often mysterious, but always offered with care. And perhaps that's what stays with us most, not the strange ingredients or the copper tools, but the simple truth that someone, thousands of years ago, knelt beside another person in pain and tried to help. So close your eyes now. Let the quiet hum of the Nile rock you gently. Let the gods watch from afar, peaceful and unbothered. You are warm, you are safe. And somewhere deep in the sands of time, an old healer smiles, end of script, Sweet dreams.